roll.
This is an interview at the New York State Military Museum, Saratoga Springs, New York. The 6th of January, 2006, approximately 3:15 p.m. Interviewers are Wayne Clark and Mike Russert. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Noel J. Hotchkiss, 12/25/40, Syracuse, New York.
Okay, what was your education prior to entering service?
I was a graduate of Syracuse University and their ROTC program.
Okay. Did you go right from Syracuse University into the military?
Well, I had about a 6-month delay for my entry date, so I taught school as a long-term sub.
Mm-hmm.
But I hadn't requested the delay. It's just that it took a year to get everyone in.
Okay. When did you go into service?
Actually, in 1963, the spring of '63.
Okay. And you entered the Army?
Yes.
Okay.
Where did you go for your basic and a?
I went to basic training through ROTC summer camp at Fort Devens, Massachusetts in my junior year, and then immediately reported to Fort Knox, Kentucky for the Armor Officer Basic Course.
Okay. All right. What was your training like there?
Well, I thought it was challenging. I enjoyed both the training, and I thought it was effective in preparing me to become a platoon leader, a tank platoon leader.
Mm-hmm. Now, what kind of tanks did you train with?
M48A1s.
Okay.
And I reported to the 1st Infantry Division, 1st Battalion, 69th Armor, 1st Infantry Division, and I was in Company E for a very short period of time, and they redesignated from the pentomic structure to ROAD, and I became Company E, became Company B of the 2nd Battalion, 63rd Armor. They redesignated from 69th to 63rd, and I spent my time then in the 2nd Battalion, 63rd Armor.
All right. How long were you at Knox, Fort Knox?
I was at Fort Knox for whatever it was, 9 weeks or 10 weeks for the basic course, and then I spent the rest of my 2 years at Fort Riley. And I was sent, we had a number of rather high-profile opposing forces exercises and Army training tests and so forth coming at us, and I was sent for intelligence training. So I spent a great deal of my career doing intelligence work.
Mm-hmm. Where did you do the training for intelligence?
Oh, I have been to a number of schools. Fort Sheridan, Illinois, when I was on active duty, and then in the reserve components. Fort Meade, Fort, gosh, where was I? I think I went to Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Was that Fort Bragg?
Fort Bragg. I spent some time at Fort Bragg. I think I was there twice.
Okay, what kind of systems did you work with the intelligence?
Well, they basically taught me to be anything from a battalion to a division G2, battalion or brigade S2, division G2, and intelligence analyst, working with the order of battle and so forth. It was very interesting training.
In what way?
Well, ultimately I got to train our brigade soldiers at the 27th Brigade, New York Army National Guard. We knew there was a large exercise coming up the following year, so we had each...
Now, what year was that approximately?
I would have to guess late 70s. And they gave us, my S2 section, a battalion a day to train them on reporting and patrolling. And when we finally got to the exercise, we were actually processing information up to division and corps level more quickly than the controllers were. They had a group of controllers coming in to run this exercise. And we're very proud of what we had accomplished. And whenever we had something like that coming up, I have served as an S3, assistant S3, and so forth. But when something like that was coming along, I was always ended up in the S2 slot because we did a pretty good job. We had an effective section.
Now, what is exactly for for someone watching this? What do you do in a G2 or S2?
What you do is you process information, and it's your responsibility to come up with an intelligence summary as to what has taken place during the day, and you are to be able to brief the commanders and the operations officer as to what the most likely course of enemy action is. We played the CAMS exercise, which was a computer-generated war game out of Fort Leavenworth, using online computers to keep track of what was happening. And we played it twice. We did very well the first time, and they had us play it again. And we were even more effective the second time because the commander, who was at that time Colonel Verbeck, General Verbeck later, told me to kind of wing it. Take chances. We've already proved that we've done a good job. Now we're playing it a second time. And we did a very effective job. My section was outstanding. It really was. We had some outstanding intelligence analysts, an intelligent, very intelligent master sergeant who ran the enlisted people in the operation, and we were right on the money with that exercise.
Were you ever connected at all with any CIA I guess
I have some
exercises, so on?
I have some
with them,
interesting
or-
stories. I had some connection with the FBI, which was probably prompted by the CIA. A submarine went down in the ocean, and we got there first, and we were picking through the oil slick before the Soviets got there. And I'm
This
trying to
was a
remember
Soviet
when that
submarine?
was. It was a Soviet submarine, probably in the early 70s or mid-70s. And I had someone show up at the Genesee Street Armory to interview
No,
me.
this
and
was in Syracuse.
this was in Syracuse, and they wanted to know why my name was on a piece of paper floating in that debris. And I asked them, were there any other names on it? Well, we can't divulge that. And I said, well, how would I know why my name was in the debris? Finally, I did get them to tell me a couple of other names, and it pieced out that what it was is an order of battle on the, at that time probably would have been the 50th Armored Division. And I recognized that along with my name there were some S2s of other battalions or other brigades in the 50th Armored Division.
Now, this was information the Soviets had.
This was information that submarine was either had as part of a publication or, I don't know, taking it back, or I don't know. I didn't see the paper, whether it was handwritten notes or a published document. I don't know what it was. But obviously it was part of an order of battle, and they thanked me, and I think first they were suspicious as to why my name was there, but it made sense, and I think that solved the dilemma for
Now,
me.
how long were you in the military? When did you exit the military?
I was on active duty 63 to 65 in the 27th Division for a few months until they reorganized 27th Brigade for 19 years, and then I was in the reserve components for, what would that be, 6 or 7 years, till I had my 28 years of commissioned service.
Now,
No? Well, go ahead.
were you involved in the prison strike back in
Yes.
the early 80s?
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that at all?
Well, I might make someone upset. I was in the armory, the 27th Brigade Armory at Genesee Street, and I don't view that my role was, or that my title was commander during the night shift, but that in effect was what it was. And General Lana was in the state headquarters occupying the same role at that level. And they had made an agreement with the prison guards ringing the Auburn prison that they would not, if they allowed the troops to go in and out, because there was no place to house them in there. They were housing them in Auburn someplace. Some at the Armory, but some park as well. They wouldn't hassle them too much if we didn't take any food in or out. Well, for 2 days in a row, they were running low on food supplies for the prisoners. And for 2 days in a row, I was calling General Lana to ask for permission for this helicopter to go into Auburn Prison, into the prison yard. And General Lana was not securing it, this permission. And finally, I think it was the 3rd day, the pilot's in the air again, taking off from Hancock Field, headed toward Auburn, gets me on the radio in the Armory, and asks again for permission to land. And I again made the call to Albany, and General Lana got on the phone, and he just said to me, he says, "Are you a career officer? Are you a full-timer or a part-time guardsman?" I said, "I'm a part-time guardsman." He says, "Well, do you think it's safe for that helicopter to go in?" I said, "The pilot says there's room, but it's not legally, it doesn't meet the space restrictions." He said, "How low are they in food?" I said, "Well, they're basically out at this point. Someone has to get food in there." He suggested that maybe I would want to put my career on the line to let the pilot land, which I did. I told the pilot, I said, "I'm taking responsibility for you going in. If you think you can safely land in there, it's up to you whether you actually take advantage of this permission." And that was the last I heard of it. No repercussions. The helicopter landed and the prisoners ate well.
Okay. Any other incidents during the strike?
I remember that one of our battalions, the 2108, went to Dannemora, and I don't know how many vehicles they had in their convoy, several dozens. And there wasn't a piece of glass left in any vehicle, and some of our drivers had to be taken to the hospital, have glass removed from their faces and eyes. I recall that. I recall the feces and urine being dumped on people at Elmira.
And that
Just
was by the
by
strikers?
By the strikers. There's a kind of a humorous story. There was a man who served, I'm not sure I have the details of how long his sentence was, but let's say he had a 20-year sentence, something like that. And he was 4 months to go, and he was on a work release program where he went to the prison nights and weekends, but he went to his job to get ready to be released. Well, the strikers immediately recognized him, and they wouldn't let him in and were taunting him that now you're going to serve 10 years for breaking out of jail and this sort of thing. So the man had presence of mind to go to a phone booth, and he called the superintendent, Henderson, I believe his name was, at Auburn, and told him his plight. He said, "Well, maybe the National Guard can get you in," but he said, "Do you have any relatives in the area?" And the man said, "Well, in Oswego." "Do you have enough money to get there?" "Well, yes." He said, "I have a deal for you. You watch the newspapers, and if you're back within 48 hours of the end of this strike, I will view that you have never been gone." So I thought that was a realistic solution to the problem.
Now, what kind of changes, while you were in intelligence work, what kind of changes did you see with the technology during that time?
Well, not much, really. It was still a paper crunch exercise, and you really had to have a well-trained section to keep this straight, and you had to have just kind of, I think it's an art to project from the information and put the small pieces together into larger ones and form the big picture. And our section was pretty talented at that. We also had a former Green Beret and a man that I think was a part of the CIA and was using the National Guard as a cover, he would get orders to go all kinds of places, and then he'd be talking about, in conversation, not where he was, but he knew an awful lot about what was going on in Latin America at that time. And I believe he might even have been on the rescue mission, or ready to be on the rescue mission that tried to extract those people that crashed in the desert, when they went into Iran to try to rescue the hostages. He seemed to be very knowledgeable about those types of things. So we had some real talent in my S2 section.
Were you in the Syracuse area?
By the way, I probably could mention names. Tom Adams, Captain Tom Adams, was the one that I thought was in the CIA, and Captain Golden, trying to think, Bob Golden, he was on the Sante raid in Vietnam, ex-Green Beret, and he was in my section. And I admit they did not fit in to garrison soldiering, so I think that's why I ended up with them, and I made good use of them.
Were you in Syracuse, in what years were you in Syracuse, I guess is what I want to ask.
I joined the National Guard, the 2nd Battalion, 108th Tank Battalion, in 1965. Very quickly it became part of the 27th Brigade because the old 27th Division was, reorganized. And then I spent some time, I was both the S3 at one time and the XO of the 108th Mechanized in Auburn. But most of my time I ended up always ending up at Brigade.
Were you aware of any use of intelligence units gathering information on anti-war groups at that time?
I wasn't aware of that. We had an interesting episode. I was teaching SAIDA, Subversion and Espionage Directed Against the United States Army, at ESMA, Officer Candidate School, Empire State Military Academy. And being on Genesee Street in University, we were right down the hill from the university, Syracuse University. I gave the officer candidates a break, and all of a sudden our doorbell rang, and some young college students were in a peace march. They were handing out copies of the Daily Worker, and how terrible the war was and all of this. So they rang the doorbell, and I saw them out there, and I invited them in the lobby of the armory. And they were starting to give their spiel to me. College kids, they thought it was cool that they were in the armory,
Yeah.
And I said, don't give it to me, give it to the, you say we won't let you speak your mind. I have a class starting in about 5 minutes, come on in. And they, you kidding me? No. It happened to be Saida. Okay. So these two college students come in, and I get the class going, and I said, we still have some peace protesters here. They're handing out the Daily Worker. Do you have enough copies for everyone? Well, yes. And they handed them out. They gave their spiel, an anti-war spiel, and then decided they were getting a little nervous. This was not what they had anticipated, and they decided to leave. Well, my problem was after class, I could not convince the students that that wasn't staged. That I had some other guardsmen come in, and where did I get copies of the Daily Worker to do this, and what a great training aid. And no, you got this wrong. So that was, I thought, a humorous anecdote.
Now you donated a Soviet uniform
Yes.
to the museum. How did you obtain that?
I was, in my civilian life, principal at Jordan Elbridge High School in western Onondaga County. And I had a student come in who said that he had a relative, this was the late 80s, when the Soviet Union was kind of, under Gorbachev, kind of loosening up, and he was able to travel. He was a cousin of this young man's grandmother, and he wanted to bring him to school to visit, and of course we had a rule that you had to sign up and get a visitor's pass and let people know that if you're having a visitor. And I said yes, and provided that he would bring him in to talk to me too. And the grandmother accompanied him, and we spent about 2 hours talking. And he really said, not that I believed the propaganda in the first place, but I'll never believe we're going to bury you. I've just been to Wegmans and to Kmart, and there's no way we're burying you. But the young man knew I had a military affiliation, and he then asked me if there's anything I'd like to have him bring back to me from the Soviet Union if he had the opportunity and he had a chance to talk to me again. And I said, well, I'd love a Soviet military belt buckle or a military insignia. And lo and behold, about 2 or 3 years later, he comes back with his cousin's
Why don't you hold the photograph
uniform.
in front of you?
I'm
If you hold
modeling.
it up.
I'm modeling it for you here. It has several medals, and the red pin is the Communist Party pin.
Okay, can you point that pin out?
I'll have to look for it. It's here on the left.
Okay, I can't quite focus in that far, but that's okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
And this happens to be a Kgb Army uniform. There was the regular Army, I guess, for lack of a better term, that went out and fought wars, and then there was a portion of the Army that was really under the control of the KGB, and they were for internal security, guarding borders and things like that. The uniforms were very similar. I'm sure that shoulder patches and things like that were the differences. And when the man came back, it was in the early 90s, 92 maybe or whatever, and asked him how things were going back home, and he told me that they have a nuclear generating plant, electrical plant, and it was rumbling, and the city was afraid of another Chernobyl. And at that time, I had worked with the U.S. Army Research Institute as a land navigation subject matter expert, and ultimately they passed my name along to this company that was made up of ex-CIA State Department people that had a contract with the Saudis to train their military, and I went over and trained them over at Mecca. It was our outdoor training ground. We were about 10 miles north of Mecca. I couldn't go in Mecca, but, and the military post was at Jeddah, the Air Defense Forces Institute. And I periodically would have to go to the Washington area to meet with those people on different things. And I happened to be going within the next day or two, and I went down there and I told my boss there what this man had said. He brought in a man that was in this company, Lexus International. He was a recently retired CIA middle manager type individual. He got on the phone and called over, and they said they had a satellite going over the next 12 hours or so, and they'd take a look. He told me the next day that they did, and they saw something wrong, and because relations were pretty good with the Soviet Union, they might not have wanted to admit the weakness, but once we knew it, they were willing to take our assistance. And who knew? Maybe the plant manager was afraid to tell his higher-ups that he was having a problem. Maybe the hierarchy really didn't know they had a problem. So I don't know whether the city was saved from another Chernobyl or not, but certainly he hadn't made up the story. It was real, and they got some assistance as a result of that. So I felt pretty good about that experience.
Do you have any other experiences you want to add?
Yes, I was brought in here by Harriet Finch. You know Harriet Finch? She was once my vice principal, and you may not know that her mother was the executive secretary to the comptroller of the CIA. You may not have known that.
Yeah.
You might want to interview her.
I knew that.
You knew that. Well, her mother, in order to bond with her, always used to take her on a trip, like once a year. Maybe it wasn't every year, but usually. And they'd go to China one year, and they went to Leningrad one year. And this was after things had loosened up. But I figured that they must know who her mother was. She writes a postcard back to me, Noel Hotchkiss, commander, Jordan Elbridge High School instead of principal or something like that. You'd have a ball scoping this place out or something. Love Harriet. Well, by this time I was in the U.S. Army Reserve Forces School out of Rochester. And we did 1 year, one drill a year, one Sunday a year. We did something for the community, and since it was headquartered in Rochester, we went to the Newark Developmental Center. Do you know what that is?
I know what it is.
It's extremely mentally retarded people who, most of them can't talk, and you're supposed to watch them so they don't grab cigarette butts and eat them before you get to them. Well, they had, the best way I could describe it is like a fireman's field day for them, and it was a family outing. Well, those that didn't have families that came, we were their escorts. Well, our charges finally got tired. They got tired a lot slower than we did. And they wanted to hear the band playing, sitting on the lawn. All of a sudden, this man comes over, and he said, in a Russian accent, he said he was 21 years old, and his father was a physicist, and he was stationed at the Soviet embassy at the United Nations. And they were on their way back from Toronto and just happened to hear about this field day. Now this is for, mentally retarded people. And they thought that sounded like fun, so they'd stop by. And they'd walk up to the three officers, all of us were lieutenant colonels, and with our charges sitting down there listening to the music, and they start a conversation. He said, well, what are you people? You're in military uniform. Are you regular Army? No, we're in the reserve components, a reservoir. And of course we pictured a lake full of water, explained why we laughed. And pretty soon he starts focusing in on me. And he said, well, what do you do outside of the military? I said, I'm a high school principal. Well, where? And I said, you would never have heard of it, Jordan Elbridge. Well, you wouldn't know. And so I didn't tell him. Finally, he asked if it were a secret, a government secret. No, it's not a government secret where I'm from. And at this point, I'm just looking at him, and he's asking questions about what's that rank mean? What does this insignia mean? What's that ribbon mean? And as conversation along the way, but he's still focusing. He says, well, will you tell me what school you're from? I said, all right, where's your father? Oh, he's over there. And he waved to his father. He was quite a distance off. And so the father waved back. We all, the three of us, waved at the father. And he then starts zeroing in. What is the name of the school? Can't you tell me? I said, it's Jordan Elbridge. And he just about knocked my socks off. He said, the Jordan Elbridge Eagles. Now, Weedsport is next door, and I didn't even remember that Weedsport were the Warriors at that point. So how does this Soviet guy know that I'm from the Jordan Elbridge Eagles? So I asked him, I said, how do you know we're the Jordan Elbridge Eagles? That doesn't make sense. He said, oh, we have their band cookbook. And I said, oh, really? Yes, we know one of the editors of this cookbook, and he named the name. Well, I went back and checked that out later, and it wasn't true. They never heard of this person, but they obviously had the cookbook, and that's what they... Finally, the guy just was asking about, would you ever consider having us to a house party or something like that at your place, and we can have a conversation? I called the FBI the next day, and the FBI said, do you have any idea? And I said, well, this is the only thing. Harriet Finch, mother comptroller, secretary of the comptroller of the CIA before she retired. Harriet sent me this postcard from the Soviet Union. They didn't find me on that parade ground, that park ground by chance. There's no question of that. And they thanked me for tipping them off. And they said, are you planning to have them at a party? I said, I wasn't planning to. Do you want me to? And they said, no. And within a month, I saw this guy. He was declared persona non grata, and he was on the evening news waving goodbye off the steps of the plane, Aeroflot, on his way back to the Soviet Union. So I assume that he either got himself found out some other way or that was the result of it. I don't know. But that's why I kind of laughed. Did I ever have any contact with the CIA. Not really, but the KGB, yes.
Now, when did you retire?
I retired in, let's see, what would it have been, 28 years of service. From 62 I was commissioned, 90.
Okay. How do you think your time in the service affected your life?
Well, it certainly affected my life, getting involved with the Army Research Institute, the opportunity I had to go to the Middle East, and then that led to my writing a book on how to navigate with GPS for the common layman when this was starting to come out. And the book sold about 28,000 copies, which wasn't too bad. I feel that the military just broadened my horizons. It made me a better leader. It prepared me for my career in education administration. I enjoyed my work in intelligence as well as in armor. And I just felt it was a very broadening experience. Wouldn't have traded it for anything.
Okay, great,
Thank you.
thank you.